because you're a sort of stress expert, presumably you're very good at managing your own stress.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? It's a question that honestly, if I had £1 for every time somebody asked me, I bet you never get stressed. I'd be a multimillionaire. It's not that I don't get stressed, because that would be like saying to a mechanic, I bet your car never breaks down, or saying to a doctor, I bet you never get ill. Of course the doctor gets ill. Of course the mechanic's car breaks down, but they just know what to do when it happens. And I guess I describe myself in pretty much the same way. I, like everybody else, totally experience stress, but I'm able to recognize it early. I know what it looks like, I know what the signs and symptoms are, and I know what actions to take myself out from that state very quickly.
So once people know the same things that you're referring to there, can everybody be good at managing their own stress then?
Yeah, in my opinion, in my belief, our ability to manage stress is not nature, it's nurture. It's not something that we're born with, it's something that we can develop. And it doesn't matter what your starting point is. Even if you are one of those total stress heads and you kind of get stressed at the drop of a hat, we all have the ability to be able to better equip ourselves to increase our personal resilience to be able to cope with the ever-increasing demands of modern life. And often, I'll come across people that are literally overwhelmed and think, no, there's nothing I can do, and this is what I'm stuck with, and this is kind of the situation I'm in, and there's no way to change it. Well, you might not be able to change what's going on outside of yourself, but absolutely every single one of us has the ability to change how we react and respond and how we perceive what's happening to us.
How do you explain or define stress? I'm sure most people might have experienced, just feeling a bit hassled or feeling a bit agitated or whatever, and somebody may be saying, you're stressed, why are you so stressed? And then thinking, I'm not stressed, why are you telling me I'm stressed? How do you define it?
It's such a good question, one which, there wasn't really an easy answer to. When we came into existence as an organisation in 2003, so we've been around for a long time. And, we run seminars, we do workshops, and one of the first questions we always ask in a seminar is, how many of you have ever experienced stress? And you'll find every single hand in the room will go up. And then later in the workshops, we'll ask people, so how do you define stress? And you only get 1 or 2 hands go up. So it's like everybody's experienced stress, but when it comes to explaining it to someone else, that's not that easy. And that kind of means that when people say they're stressed, every person that says they're stressed is potentially suggesting something completely different to the person standing next to them. And what doesn't help is, if you talk to the professional bodies that deal with stress, if you speak to the medical professionals, they've got their kind of medical and physiological kind of definitions of stress. You've got people in the health and safety community that do a lot of work around workplace stress, and they'll have a definition. People in the psychology community have got their psychosocial models. The academics. I remember we were speaking to universities like Roehampton in London and Harvard in the States, and they were doing research on stress and had their academic models, but none of them necessarily agreed. That kind of left us with a bit of a challenge. If the experts have got a very different opinion depending on which angle they're looking at it from, how does that help the average layperson? And a funny story, I was travelling out to New York on a project, and I got sat next to this really, really interesting chap. We got talking, had a glass of wine with the guy. And eventually the conversation got around to what we do for a living. So I said, what do you do for a living then, mate? And he said, I'm a stress tester. I was like, wow, fascinating. What's the chances of that? I'm in stress management too. What's your background? You're a doctor, a professor? And he kind of looked at me blankly. I was like, what exactly do you stress test? And he said, bridges and buildings and bits of metal. And he was a structural engineer.
Brilliant.
But his expertise was stress. Now, I asked him to explain stress from his perspective. And what he offered me was an analogy of a bridge. And he said that if you've got a bridge, let's say, Tower Bridge in London, a famous bridge which everyone can visualise. And let's say on a particular day on Tower Bridge, like Transport for London go on strike, and they park all their red double-decker buses onto the bridge. And there's a tidal surge on the Thames, and HMS Belfast gets washed on, and there's capacity issues at both Heathrow and Gatwick, so they build a temporary runway across the top of the bridge. So you've got a couple of Airbus A380s and Boeing 747s that landed on there. Escape at London Zoo, and the elephants and rhinos have rushed onto there, and there's some construction work going on. It doesn't matter how well built the bridge is, whether it's Tower Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, every bridge on the planet, if enough pressure or load is applied for long enough, every bridge will ultimately collapse. And obviously when the bridge collapses, because it's literally just disintegrated into the water. But before it collapses, you will know. You will get some feedback to suggest it's not bearing the load effectively, because it'll bow, buckle, creak, fracture, crack. All of this feedback to suggest it's not bearing the load effectively. And when that's happening, you've got one or two choices. So, Hannah, let me ask you, if you've got that bridge, it's bowing and buckling, what are the choices you've got to prevent it from collapsing?
Well, you need to try and get all the load off it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so one
mend
option
the cracks.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the options that we have. Either we remove the load or we reinforce the bridge. We try and patch up the cracks, put some concrete blocks, iron girders underneath to shore it up to better equip it to bear the load effectively. Now, when this structural engineer was giving me his definition of stress, my first thought was, hold on a minute. People are exactly the same. Let's say you get to the end of your show this morning, you open up your inbox, and you've had 3,142 new emails that come in. 200 of those are marked as super urgent. You need to get them sorted before you can do anything else. On top of that, your phone's ringing, and you've got voicemails on there, and you pick up the voicemails, and the first one's from your children's childminder, and it's just phoning you to let you know the kids have got chickenpox and nits at the same time. Another message from the city council that they're doing some work on your street, and they're building up the road that is due for demolition. They kind of got the addresses wrong. They've accidentally demolished your home. If I kept going in this vein, I know these are ridiculous examples, but you kind of get where I'm going.
Absolutely.
If I put enough pressure, enough load, enough demand on any human being, doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a special forces soldier or a stay-at-home mum or whatever it is that you challenges and demands you have in your life, every human being on this planet, if enough pressure is applied for long enough, will, like the bridge, ultimately collapse. That collapse in a human being could be from a mental and emotional perspective. It could be having a breakdown. From a physical perspective, it could be health problems like serious health concerns like heart disease. The number one reason for heart disease, lots of research recently has proven that stress will trigger heart disease. So, the main cause for death on the planet today is heart disease, and the main contributing factor to heart disease is a high-stress lifestyle. And then there's things like, many forms of cancer, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, stroke. The top 4 killers on the planet, stress is a significant contributing factor. And we also then have to consider things like the ultimate permanent solution to a temporary problem. That the main cause for death in a man under the age of 45 in Western Europe today is, I'm not sure if you're aware what that is, Hannah?
No.
It's suicide.
Really?
Yeah, most people don't know that, but that is the main cause of death in a young man in Western Europe today.
Oh, how awful.
It is, and often it's, and particularly for men, it's because they don't talk about their issues, they don't express themselves, because it could be seen as a sign of weakness. Then men aren't likely to get together and go down the pub and talk about their problems. They're going to go to the pub and talk about football or the bar lady or their new golf clubs. So they're less likely to express themselves. They're more likely to get to the point where they feel they can't cope, and they might then seek the ultimate permanent solution to a temporary problem. So that's what it looks like when it collapses. But the key, most important thing for me is being able to recognize both in ourselves and the people around us, in our families, in our communities, in our workplaces, where people are bowing, buckling, groaning and creaking. What are those early signs? And what kind of things do you think are going to happen when the bridge hasn't collapsed, but they're not coping? There's clearly something not right. What kind of things would you experience, Hannah?
Well, more and more recently, I've seen that the benefits of exercise. As most people, I suppose, gone through phases in my life of, doing lots of it and then not doing it and thinking, I must get back into that. But I'm getting married this year, so I'm very, so I'm in the zone, if you like. But I'm feeling the benefit, not just seeing the benefits, but feeling the benefits emotionally and seeing how you get the sort of rush of serotonin or whatever. And it's great. I feel great after doing it.
Absolutely. So that's definitely a way of strengthening the bridge. But I guess for me, the first step for most, for most people to take on board is recognise when the bridge is bowing and buckling. Obviously, we can get to what we can do about either alleviating the load or strengthening the bridge. But the first step is kind of recognising when my bridge isn't coping, and that could be I'm not sleeping at night. I am irritable. I get, my behaviour changes. Either I become more animated and aggressive, or I become withdrawn. It could be I'm turning to alcohol, which is a common one. In our culture, the stress is, I could really use a drink. It's usually an alcoholic one. It could be nicotine. It could be caffeine. It could be sugar. These are the kind of things that people tend to turn to when they're struggling, in the inadvertent belief that it's going to help me, or help me to feel better. Now, ultimately, all of those substances are stimulants. When your body is in a stimulated state, when your body's in a state of stress, it goes into a state of stimulation because you're preparing to deal with a saber-toothed tiger. Your heart's pounding, the blood's pumping around your body. Now, in that state, if you put in more stimulants, guess what? It doesn't make you relaxed. It actually gets you more stressed. So the things that people do when they're stressed actually making the situation worse. Now, what tends to happen is, and I'm sure you've experienced this before, is that during periods of stress, you get exhausted because it takes a lot of energy to maintain yourself in a state of stress. And that is why people suddenly start craving stimulants, because you're looking at quick fix energy sort of input that will allow you to maintain yourself in that state of stress. So, the cigarettes and nicotine and alcohol and refined sugar products and caffeine, they don't actually relax you. They don't take you out from stress. They're fuel for stress. They just allow you to continue operating from that state. So, the first thing is to clear up the things that don't work. And also just be aware of what other changes you're likely to experience. Maybe you're working longer hours. Maybe you're more snappy and irritable. Maybe you're less likely to exercise or do the things that make you feel good about yourself when your bridge is bowing and buckling. And then obviously that's when we get onto, what can we do about it? So number one is looking at what can we do to alleviate the load. Is there stuff that you can delegate? Is there stuff that you can ask other people to help you with? Could you prioritize? So, all of that stuff that's on your bridge, does it need to be there right now? Is there stuff that you could part? Like, particularly like if you're planning for a wedding, there are some things that you're going to need to plan sort of, maybe 6 months in advance. There's some things that you could leave maybe until like a couple of months before, and there's a few things that you could probably leave till like a week or two before. If you've got all of that on your plate at the same time, you could find yourself getting overwhelmed, even though you don't need to be worried about that at this precise moment. Learning to say no is also another really powerful way of preventing your bridge from getting overloaded. Now, even though it's one of the shortest words in the English language, probably the hardest one for many of us to use because of the connotations attached to it.
Yeah.
If I ask you to do something and you say no to me, that could be like a real rejection, like, she doesn't want to help me out, or she's just, she's rejecting me. It could be a real kind of sod off, leave me alone. I don't want to help you, or I can't cope. So a lot of people are actually kind of fearful of using the phrase no for fear of the consequences attached to that.
Yeah.
And that's because what it means to a lot of people is a very kind of harsh negative, whereas actually I'm going to ask people to consider a no as something slightly different. I would describe a no as a negotiation opportunity. N-O, negotiation opportunity. So, Hannah, if you approach me and say, Neil, I really need you to help me with this, my first question to you would be, okay, great, this is what you want me to do. I just need you to understand, on my bridge I currently have this, and this. These are the deadlines I'm working towards. Here's the consequences of failing to achieve those deadlines. And this, whether at work or in a family unit or whatever, it's the same conversation. This new task you're asking me to take on board, is it more important than things that I'm currently working on? Okay, if so, what should I deprioritize from the things that I'm currently working on so I can take this new challenge on? What you're asking me to do is what you're asking me to take on board is a lesser priority. In that case, can I schedule this in? Or they're all of an equal priority where I don't have the capacity to cope with all of these tasks. Is there someone else that could do either this new thing or some of the things I'm currently working on? By basically having an open conversation and negotiating an appropriate outcome, nobody finds themselves feeling overwhelmed, because ultimately if I do take this task on and I fail to do it, not only have I suffered the consequences, so have you, because you've not got what you were looking for. I've not fulfilled what you've asked me to do. And by looking at it as a kind of a positive negotiation as opposed to no, I'm not going to do it, or yes, I'm going to take it on and then suffer the consequences, it just means that everybody's more likely to achieve what they're looking for.
Some people find it very hard to delegate, don't they? If they're confident in their own abilities to do something, which of course is a good situation to be in, it can be hard for people to think, no, I'll give that to someone else to do, when they think, actually, I'll probably be able to do it better myself.
Absolutely. And you particularly find this around Christmas, where there'll be one person that'll take on the brunt of the cooking, where everybody else is sitting around the TV, drinking wine and eating crackers. And ultimately I found that person who takes on all the pressure is the one that's actually going to bear the brunt of it, and is going to experience a lot of stress and is going to be absolutely exhausted at the end of the day. And, again, whether in a work setting or a family setting, it's really important to ensure that we found a way of being able to share and distribute workload so no one person's bridge ever gets overloaded.
So giving Christmas is a great example, actually. If you have got for example, the mum who's doing all the cooking, they could delegate for somebody else or the kids or whoever to look after the drinks, make sure the drinks are all right, and somebody else could be doing the snacks. So you can just be focusing on the cooking, for example, and you're delegating some of the other things that you don't need to do yourself.
Absolutely. I would actually go a step further, because in our household, it's not the mum, it's me that does all the cooking. And for years, it was me that would be up at like 6 o'clock in the morning, preparing all the food. And also, like 2.5 years ago, I went vegan, so I'm now basically preparing food for myself, as well as people that are wanting to have the full Christmas spread. And I found that actually it was pretty exhausting and overwhelming. And I've actually got to the point where it's not just delegating things like drinks and snacks, but, the actual meal itself. Like, someone's responsible for the roast potatoes, and someone's responsible for the gravy, and someone's responsible for dessert. And it just means that actually you break things down into bite-sized chunks, and no one person ever gets overwhelmed. Or whether that's, household chores in the family unit, whether that's kind of, you're preparing a picnic for the beach, and, everybody's taking responsibility for an aspect of that. Because ultimately what you find is usually there are a couple of pressure points, and if those pressure point individuals, whether that's kind of, the father that's got the responsibility of bringing in the money, and obviously I'm saying this in a very stereotypical way, but, has got the responsibility of bringing in the money to pay the household bills, and they continue feeling the pressure and they're struggling, and then that person gets to a point where they get overwhelmed and their bridge collapses because they can't cope with that pressure. When we're starting to have more open discussions and look at how we support each other as a society, because for me, I judge a society by how we deal with its most vulnerable members. And as we said earlier in the conversation, that particularly in Western Europe, we're finding that there is a significant failing, because people are compromised, generally don't feel comfortable reaching out and asking for help, and they don't often get the help they're looking for, because we don't like to talk about our problems, and we don't like to put them on other people, and people tend to carry them. And I think there's a real shout for actually getting better at talking about the challenges we're experiencing and the pressures that we find ourselves under.
Oh, there's so much to talk about, Neil, and sadly we've run out of time and we haven't got to our list yet.
Can we have do a follow-up?
I was going to say, can we have you back? Can I add something to your list on your bridge?
Absolutely, I would absolutely love to do. I always love talking to you, Hannah. And obviously, what we haven't got to is what we do to strengthen the bridge. We talked about what we do to kind of alleviate some of the load, and I think there's a real opportunity for us to spend a bit of time talking about how to strengthen the bridge. But simple things often work. Even as you mentioned, things like exercise, what you eat, what you put into your body, making sure you get a good night's sleep. These are the kind of things I think would be great for us to spend some more time talking about.
Lovely. Well, I'll be in touch after the show and we'll arrange it another time. That would be great. In the meantime, Neil, if people want to find out more information and get some tips on dealing with stress, they can visit your website, www.stress.org.uk. We've been speaking to Neil Shah, the founder of the Stress Management Society. Neil, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Look forward to it. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.